Back in 2016, Burna Boy had hit rock bottom. He had gone from promising to not good enough in a space of a year, and had become more popular for issuing death threats to online bloggers than for releasing new music. Fast forward to today, and he's now not only Grammy winner, but has also carved out his own unique musical genre. So how did he do it? Some say it's his unmatched creativity, originality, and natural talent. But like any success story, it takes more than just talent. Born Damini Ogulu, Burna Boy had a pretty normal childhood. His mom worked as a language translator, while his dad managed a welding company. Simply put, he was born into a middle-class family with somewhat of a music heritage. His maternal grandfather used to manage the legendary Fela, and his father was a huge fan of reggae music. So it didn't take too long for young Damini to develop an interest in music. And by the age of 10, he was already making his own beats on Fruity Loops.
It's like it would just be like freestyles for my boys, and like I used to like make beats on Fruity Loops. It was Fruity Loops free at the time. Like, yeah, man, sometimes I'll just record in the cupboard in my room, that thing, and then get beats off of like video games and stuff sometimes and stuff. It was just fun.
Despite having a largely uneventful childhood, his teenagers were quite the opposite, especially after he moved to London at just 17. You see, while coming to London to pursue his education might have seemed like a good decision, he was a teenager fresh out of high school, and coming to a new country at such a young age had quite an effect on him. It didn't take too long before he started getting into fights, and as you know, that never ends well. He was slapped with an 11-month jail sentence in 2010 off the back of a gang-related stabbing, but was later released on parole. At this point, Damini decided to quit school altogether and return to Nigeria to pursue a career in music. Now you may be wondering how this is relevant. Well, it's important to know to understand the controversy that surrounded his early music career. Anyway, Damini Ogulu was back in Nigeria and he was here to make his mark. Starting out in his home city of Port Harcourt, he hooked up with producer Larry Q, who basically helped kick off his music career. He got signed to Aristocrat Records in July of 2011 and released his first single titled Like to Party in 2012, which came off as a hit. It also gave a glimpse into the kind of artist Burna Boy was going to be. A talented singer, but also someone not afraid to mix things up. His debut album Life, released in 2013, was the kind you'd expect from a talented newbie in the industry. And well, it had everything, from a common theme to featuring so many top artists like Wizkid, Timaya, and 2Face, while still maintaining Burna Boy's uniqueness. In Burna Boy's own words, the album pioneered a new sound.
Yeah, it's called Afrofusion.
Afrofusion.
Yeah.
Alright. Yeah. So did I get everything? I've got the reggae, the pop, the R&B, and the Afro beats.
Yeah, there's a lot more of that.
What am I missing out?
Country.
There's no country. Where is the country?
Gospel. Yeah, so there's a bunch of stuff.
But it wasn't like Afrofusion was anything special. Basically, it was a mix of many sounds. However, the unique way Burna Boy brought all these genres together without any loss of quality is what made him truly special. But that's not all. His mom, who also doubled as his manager, played a huge role in his initial success. You see, after a successful album, most artists will choose to tour the big cities to promote their music. And I'm talking about Lagos, Abuja, Port Harcourt. For Burna Boy, he was a little different in that regard. He arranged tours in faraway cities that most artists would never even consider doing. And it was the perfect managerial masterstroke, because it made him connect with fans in the remotest of areas, while still maintaining his international appeal. Besides his mom, Burna Boy was surrounded by a supportive family like no other. His two siblings and his childhood friends, or brethrens, as Burna called them, stood with him every step of the way. All these factors played a major part in his success, but just as quickly as he rose, Burna Boy began to fall. Starting with his exit from Aristocrat Records in February of 2014, Burna Boy gradually entered into a period where he went from fan favorite to public enemy. In the years following the release of his debut album, his seemingly upward trajectory had become muddled by a couple of lows. His exit from Aristocrat Records, while it may have looked like a smart decision, meant Burna Boy was now without Larry Q, who he had worked so well with in the past. He was also without the rest of the backroom stuff that his record label had provided him in the past. He launched his own record label, Spaceship Records, in February 2015, followed by his sophomore album On a Spaceship, which made perfect sense. I mean, what better way to promote your new label than to release an album that helped promote the label? But guess what? The album wasn't received well by his fans, and it's still considered his worst album till date. It didn't help that he had become the industry's new bad boy and a scapegoat for tabloids to feast on. The press was quick to jump on any negative news about him, including his involvement in robbery attack on fellow musician Mr. 2K, which almost got him sent to jail. His situation was further complicated when people started to get wind of his ugly past in the UK. To most people, if he was capable of stabbing someone back there, robbing someone isn't exactly new terrain for him. Burna didn't help himself either, as he made it a habit to issue threats to bloggers writing negative stuff about him. Now, music isn't new to such complex characters like Burna with contrasting good and bad traits, but the stars, the ones that truly go on to make an impact, always knew how to balance it. For Burna, the solution was simple: come up with good music. His first attempt at a rebirth came in the form of a 7-track EP titled Redemption, and it was quite fitting. However, instead of providing him any form of redemption, it validated some people's belief that Burna was just a one-year wonder. Seeing as he needed something to change, Burna Boy signed a distribution deal with the American record label Atlantic Records, and let's just say things kicked off for him from that point. His first sign of success came when he released Rock Your Body and the head-banging Heaven's Gate in late 2017. Of course, this brought back some of Burna's confidence, but going into 2018, you'd expect Burna Boy to be at least a bit skeptical. However, he was going into the new year fully confident in himself, and perhaps that's what separates the greats from the rest. After a mostly silent 3-year stint, Burna Boy became a hot topic again, and this time, it wasn't some weird rumor about him. Rather, it was the release of his new album titled Outside, released in January 2018. The 44-minute album took everyone by storm with its coherent presentation. It was what everyone had expected from Burna for a long time and more. His malleable vocals gave life to his wonderful songwriting. It was like a reintroduction of Burna Boy to the music industry, and this time, it was clear that Burna Boy truly understood his strengths. In fact, it was almost as if he had rediscovered himself. It's fair to say Outside turned out to be so great because Burna Boy understood his abilities much better and took full advantage of them. Songs like Heaven's Gate, Rock Your Body, and Streets of Africa gave us an insight into Burna's mind, but it was Ye that really killed it. The song was fire, and it also helped that Kanye West had just released his new album titled Ye. Now, we can't say for sure if this was some marketing strategy or something, but nonetheless, Burna Boy benefited from it. It gave him a wider audience and became the start of a crazy creative run like no other, something we've rarely seen with African artists. If anything, Outside had given him more exposure than he'd gotten in his entire career up till this point, and knowing that, he wasn't just going to stop at just marketing the album. His Life on the Outside tour was his way of introducing himself to the US audience, and would be one of the ingredients in his eventual Grammy win. Just a few years later, he had also begun to make plans for a new album, with smash hits Gbona and On the Low already making waves everywhere. So if Burna Boy was confident going into 2018, he was downright cocky going into 2019. The kind of success he had gotten in just 1 year was what some artists would dream of, and for him there was no slowing down. From day one, Burna Boy took everyone by storm when he was announced as part of the lineup for the popular Coachella Festival. But here's where things get interesting. Despite being chosen to perform at the festival, Burna Boy had a problem with the positioning of his name on the list, as well as the small font used to write his name. He instead declared himself an African giant, something a lot of people viewed as arrogant back then. Little did they know that Burna Boy was about to prove exactly why he was an African giant. Off the back of a successful 2018, and with most of his singles still in public rotation, Burna Boy started 2019 with 2 big singles, Dangote and the Zlatan-assisted Killendom. This pretty much retained the hype he'd built in 2018, but the main course was yet to come. In a musical masterstroke, Burna Boy released his new album in July of 2019. Ironically, it was titled African Giant. Now, if you remember his little piece of drama with the organizers of Coachella, you'd see why African Giant was a fitting name to his album. But it takes some kind of balls to come up with that. Knowing a misstep in the album would only open the floodgates of criticism. Yet Burna didn't hold back, delivering a musical masterpiece that elevated him from an African giant to the African giant. The album improved on the airs of his previous album Outside, which lacked any sonic cohesion or central theme. Of course, Burna Boy isn't the only one guilty of this. If you've listened to Nigerian music enough, you'll find that a lot of big-name artists are equally guilty. It's almost as if they just pack all their recent hit songs along with a handful of filters into one track and call it an album. This was where Burna Boy set himself apart, with an album that flowed seamlessly from track to track and collaborations with artists like Georgia Smith, Future, and Angelique Kidjo that basically cemented his place as an undisputed king of Afrofusion. One of the things that stood out on the album was the way he conducted himself even when featuring A-list artists. It was sort of his way of saying, I will stick to my core and you will bend to my act. It's really nothing much, but we've seen so many African artists tweak their music to accommodate big foreign names. With African Giant, Burna showed us his versatility. From love songs to addressing socio-political issues and his creativity. To be able to put all of that together into one album while collaborating with so many big names and still sticking to his own sounds. Talk about impressive. Now, unlike Outside, which had Ye as its main smash hit, African Giant really had no standout song. Rather, it was received as an entire body of art, not just because of some hit song. What followed was a largely successful tour around North America and Europe to promote his new album. However, there was more to come. In November of 2019, Burna Boy was nominated under a Grammy under the Best World Music Album category, and it was quite fitting. On the first track of the album, Burna had predicted that one day he would win a Grammy. However, it still came as a surprise because nobody could have predicted Burna Boy getting nominated for a Grammy. And it was at this point that people truly started to acknowledge how good he was. Burna Boy had not only just released 2 MVP-worthy albums in a row, he had also picked up a Grammy nomination on the way. And there were all indications that he was about to do it for the 3rd year running. Now, despite a slow start to an unusual year, Burna Boy's first single of 2020, Odogwu, was well received. But the biggest disappointment of the year awaited him in the form of a Grammy loss. Apparently, the Grammy organizers had decided Angelique Kidjo's Celia was more deserving than Burna Boy's African Giant. Knowing Burna, he wasn't afraid to express his displeasure and did just that in a tweet. He also wasn't one to take things lying down. He was gonna get his head up and continue working. Well, if you think of it, there's something about Burna Boy's trajectory since 2018, that every new album is driven by a need to level up after some form of controversy or setback. Now it was a question of if Burna could do that when it really mattered. The simple answer is he could. Burna Boy's 2020 album Twice as Tall saw him turn his low point into a launchpad for success. He basically took that L from the Grammy loss and gave us a 15-track album that finally earned him a Grammy win in 2021. At that point, there were already conversations comparing him to Davido and Wizkid, with some even placing him ahead of the 2 big stars. In a sense, Burna Boy was the first to really disrupt the duopoly atop Nigeria's music scene. In fact, some would argue that he had shown himself to be already better than those two. In the aftermath of his Grammy win, he went on an even more impressive run, selling out the O2 Arena and becoming the first Nigerian artist to sell out the Madison Square Garden. Well, rather than just disappear into oblivion like most people would, he's actually gone on to make a name for himself among the biggest Nigerian artists.
To remember a great musician, to remember a person who stood for something, I mean,